Silence. It's the one thing they thought they understood.
The avoidant has lived in silence their whole life, not the peaceful kind, but the kind that builds walls so high even they can't remember what's on the other side. They've used it as a shield, a strategy, a way to keep control of what gets in and what doesn't.
But then something shifts. Your silence enters the room. And it's not the silence they know. It's not born from fear or retreat. It's not passive, desperate, or waiting for them to break it. Your silence has weight. It has intention. It's the kind that says, I have nothing left to prove to you. And that's when the armor they've worn for so long starts to crack. If you've ever been in it with an avoidant, you know the feeling of chasing connection that keeps slipping through your fingers. You reach out sometimes with words, sometimes with actions, sometimes with your very presence. And what you get back is distance. A text that feels like a placeholder. A glance that barely lands. Affection that comes and goes like the tide, never staying long enough for you to relax. You think if you can just show them your heart a little more, they'll open theirs. If you can just prove your loyalty, your patience, your understanding, they'll finally stop running. But that's the trap. The more you give in their language of pursuit, the more they retreat into the safety of their inner world. Avoidants are used to holding the power by holding back. They've built their identity around being the one who needs less, feels less, reveals less. And for a while, that imbalance works in their favor. They're the one you're leaning toward. They're the one who can decide when and how the contact happens. But silence, your silence changes the game. Because it removes the one thing they were counting on, your constant signal that you're still there, still invested, still waiting for the door to open. At first, they might not notice. They may even think they've won by pulling you into their familiar emptiness. But this silence isn't emptiness. It's space. Space you've claimed. Space that's no longer filled with longing for them. And eventually, that space echoes back at them in a way they can't ignore. The first thing that happens when your silence is real, when it's no longer a tactic but a truth, is that the avoidant feels something they're not accustomed to feeling: displacement. They're used to being the center of your emotional orbit. Even if they didn't want closeness, they relied on your pursuit to confirm their place in your life. It was a silent agreement. You'd reach, they'd pull back, you'd try again. The dance was predictable, and in that predictability, they felt safe. Not safe in love, safe in control. But when you stop feeding that cycle, they're suddenly without a role. Your absence forces them into a space they've avoided their whole life. Uncertainty. Who are they in this connection if you're not the one holding the thread between you? Where do they stand if you've stopped standing there, waiting? This uncertainty stirs something deep. At first, it may show up as irritation. They might tell themselves you're being petty, dramatic, or manipulative. They might try write off your silence as just another way to get their attention. But underneath the surface, the truth is much more vulnerable. They don't know where they live in your world anymore. And for someone whose strategy is to stay unpinned, that sudden rootlessness is terrifying. Avoidants often mistake emotional control for emotional safety. If they can decide when to connect, when to pull away, when to speak, and when to disappear, they can protect themselves from being overwhelmed or rejected. But your silence disrupts that control without confrontation. You're not slamming doors, not sending angry messages, not begging for clarity. You're simply not there. That lack of resistance is unnerving to them because it means the dynamic they were counting on, the one where they hold all the keys, is no longer theirs to manage. And here's the thing. Control is only satisfying if someone else is playing the game. The moment you put down the ball, their power doesn't feel like power anymore. And so, almost without realizing it, they begin to feel the weight of your absence. It's not just that you're quiet, it's that your silence feels clean. It's not charged with hope or hurt. And when silence isn't charged, it becomes something they can't fight with, and that scares them far more than any words you could say. That fear they feel in your clean silence doesn't just sit there. Over time, it begins to morph into something they don't want to name: longing. At first, they'll fight it. Avoidants are experts at convincing themselves they don't need what they need. They'll distract themselves, lean harder into work, scroll endlessly, date casually, or convince themselves that they're better off without you. They might even double down on the story they tell themselves, that closeness equals suffocation, that needing someone is weakness, that they are better alone. But here's the quiet truth about human attachment. You don't get to opt out of it completely. Even the most avoidant heart craves resonance, even if they've spent years burying that truth under self-protection. And your silence, it's like taking away a mirror they didn't realize they'd been looking into every day. Suddenly they can't see themselves in your eyes anymore. And whether they admit it or not, they miss that reflection. They start remembering small things. The way your voice softened when you said their name. The way you noticed when they were off, even if they never admitted it. The way you didn't just see their surface. You saw the hidden currents beneath. And for someone who's built a life on not being fully seen, that kind of memory is hard to shake. Here's the paradox. Avoidants often feel safest when you're at arm's length, but they feel most alive when they're close enough to be known. Your absence removes both the safety and the aliveness, and what's left is a hollow space that no distraction can fully fill. This is when the cracks in their armor start to show, even to themselves. They might replay your last interactions in their mind, wondering if they pushed too far or misread your tolerance. They might even start to sense that maybe, just maybe, you've shifted in a way that has nothing to do with them anymore. And that's when the longing deepens. Because for someone used to running, there is nothing more magnetic than realizing the person they ran from might not be waiting when they turn around. If this is landing for you, subscribe. We're just getting started. Because what happens next is where the real shift begins, when the longing grows heavy enough to challenge their pride and they start feeling something they rarely admit: regret. Regret is a complicated thing for an avoidant. It doesn't come in a clean wave with a simple, "I was wrong." No. For them, regret often comes in disguised forms: irritability, sudden bursts of nostalgia, or a restless energy they can't quite name. They might catch themselves scrolling through old photos or lingering over an object you gave them, but instead of smiling, there's this strange heaviness in their chest. They don't call it missing you. That would feel too vulnerable. They call it curiosity, or even annoyance at themselves for thinking about you at all. But under that surface, the truth is simple. They're starting to see the places where their armor didn't protect them. It just cost them something. The silence you've held forces them into a kind of accountability they can't sidestep. When you were still speaking, still reaching out, they could lean on the illusion that you'd always be there. They could dismiss your needs, delay their responses, avoid the deeper conversations, because deep down, they believed you'd keep coming back. But now, you've stepped out of the dance. You've left them alone with their choices. And for the first time, those choices don't feel as justified as they did in the moment. This is the stage where the avoidant starts replaying moments they once brushed off. The night you opened up about something vulnerable and they changed the subject. The time you asked for reassurance and they withdrew instead. The arguments they ended with silence because they didn't want to deal with it. At the time, they told themselves those decisions kept the peace or protected their independence. Now with distance, they see something else. Maybe those moments weren't strength. Maybe they were fear. And here's where it gets interesting. Regret in an avoidant isn't just about missing you. It's about the uncomfortable recognition that they acted out of self-protection instead of self-respect. That their avoidance didn't just push you away, it kept them small. And that realization stings, because pride is often their last line of defense. They may not say it out loud yet, but they feel it. The cracks are widening. The story they told themselves that you needed them more than they needed you no longer holds up in the silence. And with every passing day that you don't reach out, that story erodes even further. Because soon, that regret starts morphing into something more potent, an urge to bridge the gap. And when an avoidant gets close to crossing that threshold, Their internal world shifts in ways they can't fully control. There's a moment, and it doesn't always happen quickly, when regret stops being a background hum and starts pressing on them like a weight they can't shake. It's subtle at first. They might find themselves about to send you something casual, like a meme or a short question, and then they freeze. Why? Because they know it's not really casual. It's a breadcrumb. It's the start of them chipping away at the wall they built. This is the stage where their inner conflict peaks. On one hand, they've spent years, maybe decades, perfecting the art of staying emotionally untouchable. On the other, the silence you've created has dismantled their sense of control in ways they didn't anticipate. They thought you'd crack first. They thought the absence would bother you more than it bothered them. But here they are, checking their phone in moments they never used to, rehearsing conversations in their mind, and wondering what it would cost them to just say something real. And this is where your power multiplies, because you are not chasing, you are not negotiating, you are not softening the silence for them. You've let the gap stay wide enough for them to feel its full weight. That distance doesn't just make them miss you, it forces them to feel the discomfort they've been outsourcing to you all along. For an avoidant, breaking their own silence feels like stepping onto unfamiliar terrain. It's risky, exposing. They fear your rejection, your indifference, your ability to mirror back the very absence they once used to keep you small. And yet the pressure builds anyway, because regret has now transformed into a different kind of hunger. Not just for your presence, but for the relief of undoing the damage they caused. This is often when they start imagining the apology, not necessarily the one you deserve, but the one they think they can manage. It might start as a half apology cloaked in vague language. I've been thinking about you. I didn't mean to disappear. I know I messed up. To you, it might feel underwhelming. But for them, it's a seismic move. It's a crack in the armor they've worn for years. And here's the truth. When an avoidant starts thinking about apologizing, they are wrestling with something they usually avoid at all costs. The possibility of needing you. Not for validation, not for attention, but for the stability they once took for granted. And that recognition changes the entire game. Send this to someone who's been stuck in this dynamic for far too long. Because what happens next is critical. It's where the avoidant either retreats into their old defenses or finally takes the step that shifts the balance forever. When the apology begins to surface, it often arrives like a tremor before an earthquake. Subtle, a little shaky, not yet revealing its full magnitude. Maybe it's a message out of nowhere, timed at a strange hour, as if they needed to send it before they lost their nerve. Or maybe it's face-to-face, their words halting, eyes darting away, shoulders stiff, as though every sentence is a stone they have to push uphill. And here's the part most people miss. The apology itself isn't the whole point. The real power lies in the fact that they've crossed an emotional threshold they swore they'd never cross. For someone who's built an identity around never needing anyone, to stand in front of you and say, in any form, I know I hurt you, that's a fracture in their long-standing. But make no mistake, they are not suddenly transformed. An avoidance apology is not a magic doorway into happily ever after. It is instead a rare moment when their humanity outweighs their fear, and you, standing on the other side of that moment, have a choice to make. Because in this exact instant, their nervous system is alive with uncertainty. They're wondering if you'll punish them, ignore them, or make them pay for the silence they inflicted. They're wondering if this is the moment they lose you for good. And that fear, that's the same fear that kept them running in the first place. What most people do here is rush in with relief. They've been waiting so long for acknowledgement for the smallest piece of remorse that they overextend, reassuring, comforting, softening the discomfort that actually needs to stay in the room a little longer. But if you've learned anything in this journey, it's this. The apology is not the finish line. It's the opening move in a different game entirely, one where your boundaries, your standards, and your silence still matter. And that's the paradox they don't expect. They thought that by apologizing, they'd regain some of the emotional control they lost when you stopped chasing. But instead, they find you standing firmly in a new reality, one where their words are not the prize, but merely a starting point. This is the moment you can't fake. Your stillness, your clarity, the absence of desperate relief, it all communicates that you are no longer negotiating for scraps. And whether they know it or not, that is what makes the apology matter more than they ever intended. The sixth core shift will take this to its peak, showing what happens internally for them after the apology and how you decide whether this is an opening worth walking through or just another loop in the cycle. After the apology, something subtle but profound begins to unfold inside them. On the surface, they might look calmer, as though they've done their part by admitting fault. But underneath, there's a ripple effect they can't control. Avoidants are not used to seeing their words land in a space that doesn't immediately rush to comfort or erase the tension. Your composure, your ability to receive without collapsing into old patterns, leaves them in a quiet kind of awe. And here's the truth. This moment is as much about you as it is about them. Because their apology isn't the ticket back into your life, it's a mirror reflecting how far you've come. Once you might have clung to every syllable, needing to wring from it a sense of safety. Now, you're listening with discernment, not desperation. You're not measuring their sincerity by the poetry of their words, but by the consistency of what comes next. Inside them, though, there's an unfamiliar sensation, respect. They might not call it that, they might not even consciously know it's happening, but it's there. It comes from seeing someone who isn't swayed by emotional breadcrumbs, someone who can stand in the presence of their remorse without handing over all their power. This is the crack in their old story, the one where intimacy always equals loss of self. Some will try to close that crack quickly, retreating back into old defenses, because true closeness still feels dangerous. Others, the ones ready for more, will linger in it, testing what it feels like to stay without running. And the deciding factor is not your reassurance, but your boundaries. It's the unspoken message you send by how you respond. I hear you, but I don't abandon myself just because you've spoken. You can feel when the air shifts, when they realize the old dance doesn't work anymore. And in that realization, they have two choices: grow into the space you've created, or watch you walk away from it. Either way, you're not waiting on their choice to define your next move. Because silence may have broken their armor, but it's your self-respect that keeps the pieces from ever snapping back together the same way. And whether they rebuild something new with you or without you, you've already won something far greater than their apology. You've won yourself back. The truth is, breaking an avoidance armor was never about destroying them. It was about refusing to destroy yourself in the process of loving them. Your silence was not revenge, it was restoration. It was the moment you chose to stop throwing words at a wall and started building walls of your own. Not to keep love out, but to keep yourself. And here's what you might not have realized until now. The most powerful shift in this dynamic isn't in their feelings, it's in yours. You're no longer living in a constant state of hoping, waiting, interpreting. You've stepped out of the cycle where their approval was the oxygen you couldn't breathe without. Yes, they might feel regret. Yes, they might come closer. But the real victory is that your sense of worth is no longer rented space in someone else's heart. It's prime real estate inside your own. You've learned that love isn't proven by what you can endure, but by what you refuse to endure anymore. And when they look at you now, they're not seeing the person who will bend until she breaks. They're seeing someone who is willing to let go rather than betray herself. That's the kind of presence that makes even the most avoidant heart stop and think, what would it take to stand beside her, not above her, not apart from her, but with her? Some will rise to that, some won't, but that's no longer your gamble to take. Your power isn't in coaxing them into closeness. It's in knowing you'll be whole, whether they get there or not. So the next time you hear the apology, the admission, the small crack in their voice, pause, feel it, and then ask yourself, does this moment align with the life I'm building or just the life I once settled for? Because the real magic isn't in breaking their armor. It's in realizing you never needed to break through theirs to find freedom. You only needed to walk out of your own. If you're ready to keep building that kind of unshakable strength where your worth isn't up for negotiation, subscribe, not because you need more advice, but because you're stepping into more of yourself, and that's a journey worth continuing.